It was she who had to design the layout of Queen's Park. It was she who designed and built the Empire Theatre. She played a role in the beautification process of Bridgetown in the early 1920s, 1930s.
Inscriptions on tombstones, when interpreted, provide background information for fascinating analyses of societies, not just in aspects of how we celebrate the dead or the rituals we use for death, but in a broader and more comprehensive way. They provide collective perspectives on worldviews at given points in time, and they reflect the cultural aspects of the people who created these monuments or mementos. Of course, there is the obvious point that people immediately understand, such as genealogies, but far beyond this, they provide us with an intellectual discourse of the way previous societies have seen the world in which they lived, how they related to that broader view, and how this was played out. In our last program, our two tour guides revealed tales from tombs and memorial ledgers found in the yard of the Cathedral of St. Michael and All Angels. It is from there that Senator Professor Sir Henry Fraser continues the tour.
We're standing here in St. Michael's churchyard by the tomb of one of the most interesting couples in Barbadian history. It's the tomb of Sir Gilbert Thomas Gilbert Carter and his wife. Now, let me first say that there's a lot of controversy about this man's name itself, because when he came to Barbados, he was Sir Gilbert Thomas Carter. And it seems that sometime, possibly after his retirement as governor in the British Commonwealth, he added the Gilbert to his name, because Gilbert was perhaps a family name, and he became Sir Gilbert Thomas Gilbert-Carter. But he was not governor under that name. The hyphenation came later.
Sir Gilbert was governor of Barbados at a period in time. He was a British civil servant, and he saw service in West Africa. He was administrator of the Gambia, was treasurer of the then Gold Coast, which is today Ghana, became governor of Lagos and the Bahamas.
But he was an interesting man because he was a colonial governor in several parts of Africa. And one of the most interesting terms that he had was in 1890, as you can see, he was the governor of Lagos. And he had the specific mission there in southern Nigeria to interrupt and, if he could, bring to an end the slave trafficking that was still going on in the early 1890s. And he therefore established a fortification at the town of Ilaro in southern Nigeria. He then proceeded to the Bahamas as governor, and then to Barbados as governor. But while in the Bahamas, and of course the Bahamas even then, like Barbados, was becoming a center of tourism for North Americans, he met this beautiful young woman who became his wife. She was 27 years younger than him. So he came to Barbados as Sir Gilbert Thomas Carter, married to this lovely lady who was a Bostonian architect and artist. She had trained in Boston and in Italy. When they were posted from Barbados to Hong Kong, and then they retired from Hong Kong, he decided Britain was far too cold. He was a tropical flower like me, you see, and he decided he had to come back to the tropics, so they came to Barbados. They bought property at the top of Government Hill, 2 Mile Hill, 2 properties which they put together and produced this country mansion, Ilaro Court.
Ilaro Court was not built with any particular architectural style in mind, but it's perhaps most reminiscent of a Roman villa. The house is built around a central atrium, or courtyard, which is directly off the main entrance and leads to the swimming pool, which is itself in the fashion of a Roman bath. This is the house that Gertrude built. It was once reputed to have 100 windows, only 99 of which were said to ever open out of respect for royalty and Buckingham Palace. However, former housekeeper Elise Shepherd knows otherwise.
I told them, and about 70-something of them open, and majority of them close up. Some is closed, they flaps. Yeah? So it's not 100 now.
The distinctive windows are a unique combination of sash and jalousie, and the carved brackets which support them are very similar to those found on the Parliament buildings in Bridgetown. Illawarra Court. It stands on 11 acres of land bought by government back in 1976. After Lady Carter's death in 1953, Sir Gilbert died back in 1927, the house was eventually sold to the Belknap family of Kentucky, USA. That family sold it to the Barbados government at a cost of $325,000. After plans to turn it into a cultural center were dropped, it was earmarked in 1981 to become the official residence of the Prime Minister. Illawarra Court, the house that Gertrude built.
It was she who had to design the layout of Queen's Park. It was she who designed and built the Empire Theatre. She played a role in the beautification process of Bridgetown in the early 1920s, 1930s. She was a woman far ahead of her times. She even, prior to women having a vote in Barbados, she agitated and said 20 years before the vote was given to women that women in Barbados deserved and should be given the vote, that they were being treated as second-class citizens, and that this had to stop.
And it really is an interesting reflection of one of the most interesting architectural tombs in Barbados. She undoubtedly would have had a hand in designing the tomb itself with the Greek columns and the entablature, and then her death in the USA, because she left Illawarra Court eventually and went back to her hometown of Boston, and so her death is then recorded at the bottom in a modest space which she would have left for the recording of her own demise. We could talk about some of the famous parties that she used to hold at Illawarra Court, perhaps after the death of her husband.
Back in Lady Carter's time, the dining room accommodated many members of Barbadian high society at regular dinner parties. This is how the dining room looked in 1955. The Carters had left Illawarra Court by then, but one person who remained was Elise Shepherd, housekeeper to the Carters and the Belknap family that followed. She remembers the occasions when Lady Carter invited guests to dine.
Sonny used to have 120, something 80, something 90. Yes. So we have a buffet dinner. Because when they were like that, there's too many of them to sit down around the table. They generally have a buffet dinner and they find themselves where they feel like they sit down around the pool, up in the shake room, up in the dining room where they feel like. And she would get most of her things from Goddard. That time Goddard was in Broad Street. Okay? And she had special wines. You can send her any and every kind of wine. Those wine had to come to her, some half dozen, and she had to taste each one of them. She's going to pay for them till she had find out the exact one that she need. And then she would order which one she would like.
I have seen a photograph of her which hangs in the Ladies' Self-Help that she played a role in, and she dedicated it to the people of Barbados, of this island, and she wrote, "This island that I love so well." And I thought that was quite touching, because she wasn't, as we said, her navel string wasn't buried here, but she loved Barbados, and a lot of her energies and her intellectual activity were focused on making this a better place for us.
If you were to venture outside of the eastern wall of the cathedral, you would come upon the beautifully landscaped area Church Village. There's great symbolism in this. Today, the serenity and ambience of Queen's Park now flows into another area of rest, Church Village, which then flows right into the yard of the cathedral, where you will find the final resting place of Lady Gilbert Carter.
This is the tomb of Sir Grantley Adams and his wife, Lady Adams, his wife Grace. I like the simple word Adams at the top, and it tells you this is the burial place of Sir Grantley Herbert Adams, born, as we know, in 1898, and whose centenary was celebrated in 1998 with the naming of our 10 national heroes.
Grantley Herbert Adams bestrode Barbados as no one else has done in his mission to dethrone the oligarchy and deliver his people. Known as Grantley, Moses, the Messiah, and the Deliverer, he was born on April 28, 1898. He dedicated his life, like the prophets of old, to bring the oppressed masses out of crushing poverty, social and economic bondage. He faced the wrath of the oligarchy and threats to his life, his wife, and his young son, Tom. But his obvious skill as a leader led to his election in his absence as vice president when the Barbados Labour Party was formed in March 38 at the house of John Martineau in Bay Street. In 1940, they won 5 seats in the House. He traveled the length and breadth of Barbados with Hugh Springer and the young Frank Walcott, awakening the workers to their rights and the need to come together in a union. And he marched the streets of Bridgetown with T.T. Lewis and their thousands of followers. The Barbados Workers' Union was formed in 1941, and Adams was president from inception until 1954. In 1942, he was appointed a member of the Executive Committee. In 1946, in the Bush experiment, the government invited him to submit 4 names to form a semi-ministerial system of government. In 1950, adult suffrage was introduced and all Barbadians could vote. In 1954, he became premier of the first cabinet government. He had brought the people to the summit of political power and led Barbados to self-government by peaceful means. He rapidly brought the country into the 20th century, insisting on decent housing through widespread housing schemes, water supplies and a new hospital, minimal wages, social welfare, industrial reform and a deep water harbour.
The biggest single construction project ever undertaken in Barbados was the deep water harbour at the new port of Bridgetown. Work on the harbour started on August the 10th, 1957 by Richard Costain Limited, under the supervision of Messrs. Coode and Partners Consulting Engineers. 90 acres of land were reclaimed. In less than 2 years, and 5 weeks ahead of schedule, the quay wall was completed, due mainly to the high degree of skill and adaptability of our local labor force. On the 6th of May, 1961, Sir Grackley Adams, the Prime Minister of the West Indies, officially opened the port of Bridgetown. For Sir Grackley Adams, formerly Premier of Barbados and the first Prime Minister of the Federation of the West Indies, here was a dream come true. Sir Grackley was foremost among those who regarded a deep water harbour as essential to the economic advancement of Barbados. It was therefore fitting that to this man should go the honour of declaring the new harbour open.
Sir Grantley, of course, as we know, led the democratic movement from 1937 onwards and became the Premier of Barbados in 1946 when cabinet government was introduced. He was Premier from 1946 to 1958 when he became the Prime Minister of the West Indies Federation.
The Federal Prime Minister then thanked Her Royal Highness for the honour she had bestowed upon the West Indies by inaugurating the legislature on Her Majesty's behalf.
Today's ceremony is, in the truest sense, both a climax and a starting point. It is the climax of the hopes and aspirations of many generations of men and women in all our communities who have been inspired by the vision of a West Indies.
In his speech,
he died a virtual pauper, owning nothing but his treasured books and a dilapidated home, Tiralcott, a temple of his times. He served his 70 years and 10 with vision and evangelical fervour. In the words of Sir Alexander Hoyas, he stirred the imagination and captured the loyalty of the masses as no one had ever done. His closest ally, national hero Sir Hugh Springer, wrote, "He was ready when the people needed a leader who would be both the symbol of emancipation and their leader out of the wilderness into the promised land. They called him Moses. If politics was his religion and socialism his goal, Barbados and its people were the people of his God, his abiding love, his life and his legacy. Sir Grantley Adams, father of our democracy, the very model of a hero and national hero of Barbados.
So this is his tomb. It commemorates those important dates of his premiership and his prime ministership of the West Indies Federation. And then it mentions his wife, Lady Adams, who died in 1990. And it was on her death that the Barbados National Trust was literally ordered, commissioned, if you like, by Sir Hugh Springer to find a way of acquiring Tyrrell Court as a national monument and memorial to Sir Grantley and Lady Adams.
On the afternoon of October 6, 1976, as Barbadians listened attentively as the throne speech was delivered, they were learning that his name was to dignify the Sewell Airport.
And the airport at Sewell will be renamed the Grantley Adams International Airport.
And on Friday, September the 14th, 1984, what was known then as West St. Joseph School is officially renamed the Grantley Adams Memorial School. Today his portrait is found on our $100 note. Adams died on Sunday, November the 28th, 1971. After a service of thanksgiving, he was interred in this tomb. A few years later, his wife, Lady Adams, unveiled a bust in his likeness in the front courtyard of government headquarters, later replaced by a statue in his likeness on the 100th anniversary of his birth.
Over there, we see the grey marble tomb of Sir Grantley's son, Tom, JMGM Tom Adams, who became Prime Minister of Barbados in 1976 until his death, less than 10 years later, his sudden death.
It was the headline that shocked a nation. Prime Minister Tom Adams is dead. That was 10 years ago tomorrow. Michelle Hinkson looks at the life and times of this man who, over his 53 years, carved a niche for himself in the history books of our island as he moved from Barbados scholar to lawyer, politician, and Prime Minister.
Whether you liked him or not, the general consensus is he was an outstanding and brilliant man. Tom Adams took the name of Barbados far and wide, and left his mark locally as well. From education, to the economy, to infrastructural works. Take, for example, the Central Bank in Bridgetown, a Tom Adams idea, and the Offshore Banking Act of 1979, just part of the legislation Tom Adams put in place to make his dream of Barbados as an offshore business centre a reality.
The role of government and its various agencies is to provide a legislative and a regulatory framework and to maintain a stable political and social climate in which the various financial institutions may function efficiently. We also intend to develop our island as a high-quality financial center.
Other projects attributed to the late Tom Adams, an extensive road network, including the Spring Garden Highway, polyclinics, housing, and an act to protect buildings designated by the National Trust. Schooled at St. Ursula's, Harrison's College and the University of Oxford in Britain, where he studied politics, philosophy and economics, Tom Adams developed an impressive list of enviable characteristics. His biographer, F.A. Hoyos, describes him as a man who read widely, had a flair for debating and organization, a retentive memory, and a generally insatiable thirst for knowledge. Once back home from studies in 1963, Adams was gradually recognized as being more intellectual than his distinguished father, Sir Grantley Adams. Tom Adams became General Secretary of the BLP in 1965, winning his first seat in the House of Assembly a year later, as MP representing the constituency of St. Thomas. It was in the early 70s, precisely after the BLP election defeat of 1971, that Tom Adams became leader of the Barbados Labour Party and its parliamentary group. He'd inherited a party decimated by 2 successive defeats in general elections, but would eventually inspire them through 2 successive wins. It's also said while he was Prime Minister from 1976 to 1985, he commanded respect and almost obedience from his cabinet colleagues. The Hoyos biography also describes him as a master of political strategy who spewed out incredible oratory on the political platform, and his style of presentation, along with unparalleled debating skills, won him the admiration of both friends and enemies. Party colleagues Senator Patricia Simmons and Henry Ford remember Tom Adams.
He exemplified the best virtues inculcated in Barbadians through education, religion, and upbringing. I also admired his oratorical gifts.
A great harbor had just been completed and was to prove true every claim made for it that with the rebuilt Sewell Airport, as it then was, Barbados would be given a launching pad for an economic takeoff.
Never pompous, never ponderous as a speaker, he was unsurpassed. He recognized the worth and contribution of women to the extent that the National Commission on the Status of Women was set up soon after he assumed control of the government in 1976.
Tom Adams was an extraordinary leader, a man with tremendous leadership capabilities, very clear in his vision of what he wanted for Barbados, very clear in his thoughts, and he was always able to grapple with the most difficult and recondite of problems. There also stands out the fact of the warmth of his friendship. He was a very warm friend. He could also be a devastating enemy. The party lost the elections very massively in 1961, and after that period, the Labour Party went through a period of change in attracting many of the younger people who were now coming out of the university, and therefore a new leadership was coming to the fore, cadre of people, and Tom Adams's outstanding contribution at that time certainly was his organizational skill, and he was able, as General Secretary of the party, to get to know the party branches and assist Bernard St. John and his father in particular in reorganizing the party.
On the regional scene, Tom Adams stands out as the Caribbean leader who played a principal role in anchoring the US-led invasion of Grenada in 1983.
Some of us in government discussed the matter, and some considered that Mr. Bishop would return to power and all would be well. I feared that Mr. Whiteman had signed his own death warrant, and so it eventually proved. I did tell the High Commissioner that my view of the Grenada situation was that the only solution was a military intervention. There has seldom in these islands been such virtually unanimous support in the media and at political and popular level for an action so potentially divisive. West Indians have shown that we have a view of our future that is democratic, peace-loving, devoted to constitutional and not arbitrary government. We have shown that we can cut through the sometimes artificial controversies generated by today's media and go right to the heart of things, what is best for our people. The United States and President Reagan have, to their eternal credit, come to the same conclusion as we have. Finally, a word of heartfelt thanks, especially to you, the people of Barbados. You have responded magnificently and supported your country with a full measure of patriotism and loyalty. Your defense force, under its outstanding commander, Brigadier Lewis, and a team of fine officers and men, has gone into action, and our pride in its performance is equaled only by its industry and steadiness. All of us must be proud of the firm commitment we have shown to the preservation of the human values which we hold so dear.
Then, after 8 years at the helm of this country, Tom Adams's eventful life suddenly and unexpectedly ended on 11th March 1985. Prime Minister Adams had collapsed suddenly at his official residence, Ilara Court, dying from heart failure. After 3 days of lying in state, 12 representatives of CARICOM, 34 from across the world, attended the state funeral held on Saturday, 16th March. The late GM Tom Adams was buried in the churchyard of the St. Michael's Cathedral.
He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on for all of us, from Barbados and the Caribbean and the Commonwealth. Father, let him be with you this day in paradise.
And that is another beautiful tomb commemorating a very influential and significant, perhaps one of the more visionary leaders of Barbados. We have the great vision of our two national heroes, Sir Grantley Adams and the Honourable Errol Walton Barrow. Well, Tom was himself a great visionary, and I remember when he told me about his idea and his plans for the ABC Highway, I was a little bit skeptical. But what would we ever do if we didn't have that highway? We would all be in a massive jam every single day. We're in a slight jam every day anyway, but Tom was a great visionary, and it is good that he is buried so close to his parents.
Do join us next week at the same time as we continue to reveal tales from the tombs. I'm Sherwood McCoskey. Good evening.
Thank you.